In the quiet sanctum of James's study, he had a brush with the grim specter of death that forever altered the tapestry of his creativity. A near-death horrific car crash, shrouded in the ominous shadows of fate, left an indelible mark on his soul. When he emerged on the precipice between life and death, James discovered an uncanny twist to his craft. He could only pen tragic endings. His vibrant tales, once woven with threads of hope and triumph, now succumbed to the inexorable pull of sorrow. Characters once destined for happiness found themselves ensnared in the cruel embrace of tragedy and death. The transformation was as stark as it was profound. The once effervescent world of his imagination now seemed to mirror the somber hues of his own encounter with mortality. James's brush with death had not only altered his perception of life, but also his understanding of his craft. His characters, once free to explore the boundless landscapes of joy and triumph, now found themselves shackled by the chains of despair. The ink that flowed from James's pen no longer sang songs of hope and victory, but instead it echoed the somber cadence. The shift in his writing was drastic, almost palpable. His vibrant tales had now been replaced by narratives steeped in sorrow and despair. The characters he created no longer danced on the canvas of his imagination, but instead, they trudged along, burdened by the weight of their tragic destinies. Yet, in the midst of this sea change, James found a strange solace in knowing he was not alone in his tragedy. His encounter with mortality had not only changed him as a person, but also as a creator. It had given him a new lens through which to view his characters, his stories, and the world at large. It had given him a deeper understanding of the human condition, the fragility of life, and the inevitability of death. There was no escaping the inevitable, and thus his pen, once a beacon of hope and joy, now echoed the somber cadence of his own encounter with mortality. His stories now bore the unmistakable imprint of his brush with death. Reality and fiction, two separate realms. But what if the boundaries started to blur? Picture this. You're a writer. Your pen is your wand, your imagination, the canvas. But suddenly the characters you've crafted, the ones you've birthed from the depths of your creativity, start to materialize. It's no hallucination. They're here, in the flesh, stepping forth from the confines of your mind, emerging from the pages of your novels into the harsh light of existence. Imagine the shock. You've breathed life into these beings, assigned them destinies, charted their paths, and now, they stand before you. Their eyes, mirrors reflecting the weight of their scripted destinies, plead for mercy. Emma, the vibrant adventurer robbed of her happily ever after, looks at you with eyes filled with desperation. She implores you to rewrite her story. These aren't just characters anymore, they're beings with feelings, with desires, with the primal instinct of self-preservation. Their lives, once confined to the black and white of your pages, now burst into a spectrum of colors in the real world. And the colors are largely hues of despair, of sorrow, of tragedy. You see, the ink that once flowed freely from your pen, crafting tales of hope and triumph, now only echoes the somber cadence of your own brush with mortality. The characters, once destined for happiness, find themselves ensnared in the cruel embrace of your tragic endings. And so, your study, once a sanctuary of solitude and creativity, transforms. It becomes a refuge for these spectral beings, these characters born from your imagination. It's a safe haven for Emma and others like her, seeking an authorial reprieve from their scripted sorrows. They ask for a chance at redemption, a chance to escape the confines of the sorrow you've penned for them. They stand before you, not as figments of your imagination, but as tangible beings yearning for a chance at happiness. And you, the author, are left grappling with the consequences of your newfound power. The worlds you've conjured in prose have bled into reality, and the characters, no longer confined within the boundaries of your mind, demand a rewrite. This is what happened to James. The power of creation, a gift or a curse? This is the question that haunted James as he grappled with the consequences of his newfound abilities. His characters now walked the earth. Their existence, a testament to the power of his pen, was marred by the tragedies he'd woven into their narratives. In the confines of his study, James found himself locked in an internal struggle, wrestling with the moral implications of his abilities. Their pleas for reprieve echoed in his ears, a haunting reminder of the power he held over their fates. The characters he'd birthed from the depths of his imagination were no longer bound to the world of fiction. They were real, tangible, and they bore the scars of their tragic endings. Their eyes held a mirror to his soul, reflecting the sorrow he'd etched into their stories. Emma, the adventurer robbed of her happily ever after, became the embodiment of his guilt. Her pleas for a reprieve weighed heavily on his conscience, a constant reminder of the power of his words. Yet, the dilemma was not his alone to bear. His characters, aware of their literary origins, rebelled against their predetermined fates. They were not content to play the tragic heroes of his narratives. They demanded change, a chance at happiness beyond the confines of their stories. In the shadows of his study they whispered tales of hope, their voices a haunting melody that echoed in the silence. Their words, once controlled by his pen, now challenged the very essence of his craft. They demanded a rewrite, a chance to escape the tragedies that defined their existence. Their pleas presented James with a dilemma: should he heed their calls and alter their destinies or remain true to his craft? The power to create, once a source of joy, had become a burdensome responsibility. The ethical quandary that James found himself in was as complex as the narratives he had written. The boundaries of his craft had morphed into an ethical labyrinth, a maze of moral dilemmas that proved to be as real as the characters he had birthed. James was no longer just an author, he had become the puppeteer of his characters' fates, their destinies interlaced with the strokes of his pen. His characters found themselves in the tangible world, their existence a testament to the power of James. But with existence came consciousness, and with consciousness came the desire for autonomy. Stripped of their agency, they sought emancipation from the shackles of predetermined sorrow. They yearned for deliverance from the tragedy that had been scripted for them. The characters' pleas for mercy echoed in James's mind, their voices a haunting reminder of the power he wielded. Each word, each sentence he penned, carried the weight of life and death, hope and despair. His narratives, once a source of entertainment and enlightenment, now bore the burden of ethical responsibility. James found himself caught in the throes of a moral predicament. He was torn between his creative freedom and the moral obligation to his characters. His craft, once a refuge from the real world, was now a bridge between fiction and reality. The stories he wrote were no longer just tales spun from his imagination. They were the destinies of sentient beings, their fates intertwined with his creativity. The specter of this ethical dilemma gnawed at the edges of James's consciousness. He was forced to confront the reality of his power, to acknowledge the consequences of his creation. The ethical labyrinth he found himself in was as tangible as the characters that populated his study, their eyes reflecting the weight of their scripted destinies. In a pivotal moment of authorial introspection, James made a choice that would redefine the contours of his narratives. He found himself at the crossroads of creativity and morality, his pen poised to rewrite the destinies of his characters. This was no longer just about crafting stories, this was about reshaping lives. With trembling hands, James tried to rewrite the fates of his characters. The words whispered in the silence of his study, the air thick with the anticipation of a narrative rebirth. His characters stood around, specters of imagination, their eyes flickering with a glimmer of hope as they watched their creator poised to alter their destinies. James's pen hovered over the parchment, the weight of expectation pressing down on him. His characters had stepped forth from the confines of his stories, demanding reprieve from the tragic endings he had penned. They yearned for redemption, for a chance to break free from the narrative chains that bound them to despair. Emboldened by the plea in their eyes, James set his pen to paper. The ink flowed, each stroke an attempt to weave a new tapestry of fate. Emma, the adventurer robbed of her joy, watched as James sought to rewrite her destiny. The shadows of despair began to recede, replaced by the faint outline of a story where hope prevailed. Yet, as the ink trailed across the parchment, something was amiss. The words that flowed from James's pen were hollow, devoid of the power to alter the narratives he had once crafted. His attempt to infuse his characters with a newfound resolve seemed to falter under the weight of his own creation. The ink seemed to resist his will. It was as if the characters he had birthed were bound by the tragedies etched into their very essence. James watched, a sense of dread creeping into his heart, as the ink failed to breathe life into the alternate realities he sought to create. His characters stood in silent anticipation, their hopes waning as the reality of their predicament became clear. The ink that flowed from James's pen was unable to grant them the reprieve they sought. Their fates remained tethered to the tragic endings that had been woven into their stories. And so, the attempt at reprieve ended, not with a triumphant flourish but with a sobering understanding of the power and limitations of a creator.